Radio. I am your host with the most, Tim Williams, and here with me again is Paul Mason.
Hey, Tim, and hey, audience. Okay, at this point, though, can we call me a host too? I feel like I've earned the title by this point.
I don't disagree. I think a solo show with just me might bore people. Anyway, now that we're a few episodes in, I thought it'd be a good idea to give the audience a little more backstory.
I guess that makes sense. After all, why listen to us, right?
Exactly. I'll go first. My title is lead developer, but I guess what I do is functionally similar to what other companies call staff developer. Anyway, I started my software development journey around 2010. I decided to make a career change because I was caught up in the 2008 financial crisis. At the time, I was a manager for Starbucks and basically had a dead end retail job. It paid fine, but I hated it. I'm an analytical person, a problem solver, so I knew I could do a lot more and probably be a lot more fulfilled with my life if I did something that used those strengths. So I decided to go back to school for computer science. The thing is, I was already really passionate about this idea. My girlfriend at the time was sidelining as a photographer. She was never super serious about it, so we couldn't justify paying someone to make a website for her. I thought, I can do this. Then I just set about learning. So while I was taking classes, I was burning the candle at both ends. I built her a website, and I had a ton of fun doing it. That's when I knew I could do this as a career, and that gave me enough juice to make it happen. So from that, I decided I could help fund school with this new skill, and that was the decision that really got things moving. I started making small static HTML websites for some local clients. I was charging next to nothing, but it was still more money than I was pulling in from Starbucks. Then I found a mentor. Haven't talked to him in years, but I bet he's doing awesome work still. He was running his own development agency at the time he called the Webhounds. I was able to leverage his client work to get involved in some more serious, larger applications. This is where the schooling and practical application really helped me get to another level. At that time, we were helping a huge range of different clients. I got to work on a big project for EA Games, a large website project for a local farmers organization, a full e commerce system for a local wine bar. I'll tell you something, as a contract developer, you really end up touching a lot of technologies. To me, no technology was off the plate. If it was already part of the stack and I had no experience in it, I'd go out and teach myself enough to start applying it, then learn it through practical application. I was learning the real technology used in the field: MySQL, jQuery, raw JavaScript, Apache, WordPress. Those were the simple days. This will date me a little, but back then we were using SVN as our source management solution. Man, now I completely take Git for granted. We have it so easy now. Anyway, eventually I got hired by a local business. Not a tech company exactly. I'd say the name, but most people wouldn't recognize it. It was my next taste of this is the right path for me. I kept the We Dev agency going, but not really taking on many new clients because my day job had me learning all kinds of new tech. My first day there, I plopped a 200-page manual on my desk and said something like, "This is clickability. This is the CMS solution the company uses. Good luck." Anyway, I'm still with this company, but we've grown into a much more mature development shop than we were back in the day. One thing that hasn't changed is we still use a huge range of technologies to accomplish everything we need. Nowadays, I'm using Cursor and working in AWS stacks, full continuous integration pipelines from scratch, building native applications and novel solutions for kiosk systems for my company's on site events. I am working heavily with AI and heavily implementing AI for various systems: custom RAG systems, custom MCP servers, sentiment analysis, custom customer management solutions. I still sideline on the weekends every once in a while, also. I just recently had the opportunity to build a really cool AI driven therapy tool for one of my longtime clients. Anyway, to the point, I am a technology generalist. I'm mostly based in web tech, but never afraid to pick up new technologies when they are the right solution for the problem. A true full stack developer, if you will.
Well, that was exhaustive. Some things in there I didn't know. It's my turn, I guess.
Feel free to be as wordy as me.
Feel like my story is a little less interesting. I get to touch a lot of the same types of technology. I got my CS degree back in 2015, so I got into the field at a fantastic time. I didn't do agency work directly like you did, but I did work for a small web development agency for a couple years to get my start. We did mainly custom WordPress solutions. Much like you, though, we took on clients with diverse solutions already in place, so I was able to dabble in .NET, custom Salesforce development, and all kinds of crazy things. Not too long after that start, I was picked up by one of the big companies, and that's where I'm at. Not sure I'm allowed to disclose who I work for on a podcast like this without approval, but let's just say it's one of the FANG companies.
I think that'll be enough for folks. What kinds of projects are you working on these days?
Similar to you, I'm on a pretty small team, but we're doing a lot of custom AI integration work for partners.
I guess that does position us as decent voices on the software development and AI space. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of developers, especially senior and staff developers, are learning a lot of the same things right now. The landscape of software development with AI is still in its infancy, though it feels like it's radically different already.
I know. Last year I was surprised how good my autocompletes were with GitHub Copilot, and this year I am embracing agentic work. I feel like my understanding of what AI is and how to use it has increased exponentially.
It has to. To keep up with this industry, you've got to be extremely flexible and adaptive. Even then, you might end up one of the 14,000 laid off AWS workers.
Tell me about it. What a nightmare. We went from an extreme hiring boom in 2020 to a slumping market as it corrected downwards for the next couple of years to 2025, where the extreme voices are saying software developer will be extinct by the end of the year.
When you put it in that context, we have a pretty middling opinion about it. I'm a little more skeptical of AI than you, but I can see it for what it is, a pretty useful new tool.
Exactly. AI is a step change to how we approach the work, but it's not completely different than the innovations like the IDE or frameworks. In fact, I would say open source frameworks have had a much larger impact on the industry than AI has to date.
I agree. It's hard to estimate, but open source tools and frameworks underpin a massive amount of what we do and absolutely make up the foundation of the web as we know it today.
Think about this. Without all of the code open source has made available, and specifically all of the well written, peer reviewed code, if you will, would training AI models on code have even been possible?
I guess we're not close enough to the source to know the answer to that, but I would guess you're right. Where else can you find such a huge trove of quality training data?
So, this actually tees up something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I'm curious where you land on it. I'm starting to feel like AI is basically as smart as it needs to be. Like, we're past the point where smarter is the thing that matters. What's next is enabled AI, where the strength isn't the raw intelligence, it's the interaction layer. MCP servers, specialized models, tighter tool chains. We don't need the AI to be a genius, we need it to be precise.
Okay, but hold on, because I know what you mean and I even agree to an extent, but you can't just hand wave the raw model quality. If you look at the AI benchmark results, the LMSys Arena, the GAIA stuff, generalist models still absolutely wipe the floor with the specialists. The big frontier models are the ones making the real breakthroughs. So, if anything, I'd argue the opposite. We need more intelligence, not less.
See, I don't think so. I think we've hit the human level ceiling, but not in the sci fi way, in the practical way. The models are now smart enough that the bottleneck is us. It's our tools, our context windows, our interfaces, our orchestration layer. When I build something with AI today, the model isn't the problem. The problem is the glue code, the memory, the tooling. Honestly, the biggest breakthroughs I see are from good MCP servers, not from adding 500B more parameters. Have you seen how good GPT-OSS 120B is? I can run that thing on my laptop and I swear it codes better than the frontier models of a year ago. I built a couple MCPs for it and now I rarely need to use ChatGPT.
But Tim, you say that while also using the smartest models you can get your hands on every day. You're not doing your RFP agent on a 7B. You're not writing your therapy system on a tiny instruction model. You use the big ones because they're better. And that matters. Because when the generalist model gets better, everything downstream, your tools, your MCP calls, your RAG, all of it levels up.
Sure, but only to a point. What I'm saying is, we're hitting diminishing returns on raw IQ. And the reason is simple. Your LLM doesn't live in a vacuum. It has to do work. It has to touch APIs, transform data, interpret structure, handle edge cases. It's the same pattern we saw with programming languages. People think language X replaced language Y, but that's not what happened. They converged. Same thing here. The models are converging on smart enough to reason effectively. That's the baseline. But the future? The future is infrastructure.
Infrastructure matters, yeah, but the generalist models are the ones that learn how to use the infrastructure. Look at the recent agent benchmarks.
Oh, come on, Paul. You know they game those benchmarks.
Yeah, but when they test tool use, the biggest models still dominate. Even if you had the perfect MCP servers, a tiny model isn't going to magically become an expert surgeon just because you gave it access to a medical tools API. The intelligence still matters.
I'm not saying tiny model everywhere, I'm saying specialized model where it counts. Look at what happened with GPUs. We don't use one giant card for everything, we use accelerators for specific operations. Same thing will happen with models. Give me a moderately sized generalist to plan, and then route to a specialist that knows exactly how to analyze an FFmpeg pipeline, or exactly how to restructure a SQL schema, or exactly how to draft a secure authentication flow. Then glue that all together with tools that are permissioned, observable, and tightly scoped. Imagine how much less compute power that would use. Now you've optimized the quality and the compute requirements.
But now you've increased the coordination complexity. You've traded raw intelligence for orchestration overhead. And historically, in distributed systems and computing in general, more moving parts means more failure points. If one giant model can do the planning and the execution, isn't that simpler?
Only until the bill shows up. One frontier sized model doing everything is like hiring a PhD to load the dishwasher. Sure, they can do it, but why? You don't want a generalist performing tasks that a specialist can do more efficiently, more safely, and more predictably. Frontier models will always exist, but they'll be like the root brain. Most real work will be done by small, cheap, highly trained executors, all given context through tools, memories, and MCP layers.
I don't know, man. The benchmarks don't agree with you yet. When they put models head to head, planning tasks, coding tasks, reasoning tasks, the generalists are still way ahead. It's not even close. If anything, specialized models tend to collapse outside their narrow training set.
Yeah, today, but look at early GPUs. The benchmarks didn't predict CUDA either. Or early web frameworks. Nobody predicted that JavaScript would eat the entire industry. The shift doesn't show up in benchmark suites, it shows up in developer workflow. And right now, the workflow is screaming for determinism, for precision, for guardrails, for reproducibility. Raw LLM horsepower doesn't fix any of that, but tool enabled AI does.
So your take is basically intelligence plateau, tools skyrocket?
Exactly. We don't need smarter models to build better software. We need smarter systems that use models. That's the future.
All right, well, I'll take the devil's advocate seat for now, but this feels like one of those arguments where we revisit it 5 years from now and either you look like a prophet or I look like a dinosaur.
So, either way, a pretty typical Tuesday.
Fair enough.
Anyway, neither of us can tell the future. What I do know is that AI is here to stay. I can't wait for the hype to die down, though, so I can start to focus on the real value without all the noise.
You and I are 100% aligned on that one. You know that meme of the guy poking the thing with a stick? I could see that with the caption, "Come on, OpenAI, burst already."
We must be in the same Reddit circles. I can see the exact image in my head. Side note, I had this interesting idea and I wanted to bounce it off of you.
Okay, shoot.
This one occurred to me as I was building a RAG dataset for one of my little side projects. There are certain datasets that are largely static, meaning you can basically curate them and distribute them. If we came up with a standard schema, you could use that with SQLite's pretty darn powerful ability as a single file, self contained vector database with the source data's metadata alongside it.
Oh, I think this is a brilliant idea.
Essentially, you could make portable knowledge bases. With a standardized MCP, you could just swap in a knowledgeable and have a local vector powered tool you could plug into any AI system.
I think you could use that for all kinds of things. Going back to your example, you could make small knowledge bases for things like frameworks.
I didn't even think about that. My use case, it's a database of falconry knowledge. It's pretty obscure, but will be super useful for people who just have simple questions and want to be pointed in the right direction.
I do think that idea could be powerful. Based on the data you've curated for your dataset, you could fine-tune the vector overlap, size, quality to match the source material. You'll likely have better results than a generalized RAG system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where this whole RAG conversation gets kind of muddled because RAG has become the junk drawer term for anything that involves documents and an embedding model. Like when somebody says we're doing RAG, 9 times out of 10, they just mean we glued a vector DB to an LLM and called it a day.
Yeah, classic RAG is basically LLM-powered search with citations. You chunk some documents, embed them, do a cosine dance, stuff the top 5 chunks into the prompt, and ask the model to play librarian. Which is fine, that solves a real problem, but that's the shallowest version of what retrieval can do.
Right. And the problem is that people use the same word RAG for that simple search use case and for these super complex orchestrated systems with multi step reasoning, tool calls, long term memory, all of it. So when one team says RAG didn't work for us, what they usually mean is we tried naive search and pray, not that the entire paradigm is dead.
Exactly. So maybe the issue isn't RAG itself, it's that we've overloaded the term to the point of uselessness. It's like calling everything with a Lambda microservices. There are a bunch of different problems hiding under the same umbrella, and they behave really differently under stress.
Yeah, maybe the way to think about it is traditional RAG is that first bucket, question in, relevant docs out, one shot answer. Super useful for FAQs, policy docs, manuals, developer docs. But once you start doing orchestration, planning multiple calls, refining queries, updating state over time, you're not just doing RAG, you're building an actual system with retrieval as one of the core primitives.
And even within retrieval, you have different jobs. There's help me search this big static corpus. There's remind me what I said last week. There's pull the right ticket or RFP that this email is about. Those are all solved with some combination of embeddings and metadata lookup, but they are radically different from a product and architecture standpoint.
Totally. I'd almost split it like first category is what you just described, grounded search. That's the classic. I have a knowledge base, answer questions against it, don't hallucinate. Then you've got working memory, the short-term stuff that lives for a session or a task, where retrieval is more like giving the model a scratch pad than like indexing a wiki.
And then there's long-term memory, which I think people also incorrectly bucket under RAG. That's stuff like Tim prefers dark mode, hates long emails, and is terrified of surprise AWS bills. That's not the same as retrieve subsection 4.2.1 of the S3 pricing docs. It might use some of the same machinery, but conceptually it's a different problem.
Yeah, and your little falconry DB is yet another flavor. That's what I'd call a portable domain corpus. It's mostly static, super curated, and can be shipped as a file alongside the app. That's a wildly different design constraint from, say, a support bot pulling from a constantly changing Notion workspace.
So maybe instead of saying we do RAG, we should be forced to answer two questions. One, am I doing search over static-ish reference data, or am I doing dynamic state retrieval? Two, am I just grounding answers, or am I orchestrating multi-step work? Because once you admit you're orchestrating, you're in agent land whether you like that term or not.
Yeah, and orchestration is where it gets interesting. Once you let the model say, hey, my first retrieval pass wasn't good enough, let me refine the query, or let me summarize these results and store a new artifact, you've gone way past the LLM plus vector DB diagram we've all seen 1,000 times. You're effectively building a tiny OS for knowledge instead of a fancy search bar.
And that's where the term RAG really starts to fall apart because it collapses that entire stack into one acronym. No wonder half the industry thinks it's overrated. They're arguing about completely different things under the same label.
Exactly. It's like if we used one word for Skeetlight on your laptop and Google Spanner cluster and then argued about whether databases scale. The answer is it depends what you actually built. RAG as a term is trying to describe everything from I added a context window to my chatbot to we built a multi-agent retrieval pipeline with feedback loops.
So, what's the fix, do you think? Because we're not going to get the whole industry to stop saying RAG. That ship has sailed. But there's probably some discipline we can bring to how we as developers talk about it.
I think at minimum, we should stop treating RAG as an architecture and treat it as a capability. The architecture is retrieval layer, memory layer, tools layer, orchestration layer. RAG is just one way the retrieval layer gets filled, embeddings and similarity search instead of, say, purely symbolic queries or direct SQL.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. RAG is a verb, not a noun. We rag against this corpus as part of our workflow, not we built the RAG trademark symbol. And then on top of that, you call out, okay, this system has short-term scratchpad, long-term memory, static knowledge base, and a planner that knows how to bounce between them.
Exactly. And once you frame it that way, your portable knowledge bases make way more sense. They're not a RAG system on their own, they're plug-in retrieval substrates that any orchestrated system can load. The MCP is just the adapter that says, hey model, here's how you talk to this particular blob of curated knowledge.
Yeah, and that's where I think the future gets exciting. Not just RAG for your docs, but an ecosystem of swappable, high-quality corpora with well-defined access patterns. At that point, arguing about whether RAG works is like arguing whether APIs work. It's the wrong level of abstraction.
Exactly. So, to summarize the rant, RAG as a term is trying to do too much. LLM-powered search is one tiny slice of the pie, and orchestration is where all the real leverage lives. If you're building with AI in 2025, stop asking, should I use RAG, and start asking, what kinds of retrieval and memory does this system actually need?
And maybe, just maybe, stop shipping the LangChain quick start example to production and calling it a platform.
Yeah, that too. So, speaking of swapping in local knowledge and running your own corpora, that reminds me of the research we did the other day on home AI rigs. Because man, that rabbit hole got expensive fast. I swear, I went into it thinking, all right, maybe 5, 6 grand. And suddenly I'm pricing out dual RTX 6000 Pro Blackwells and 256 gigs of RAM like I'm outfitting a small research lab.
Yeah, dude, you basically spec'd a personal data center. Did you hear about PewDiePie's council rig with a bunch of 4090s?
I saw an article about that. I've seen a bunch of people building similar things, and wow, collectively they're pushing up the price of components to an insane high.
I remember you sent me that part list and I thought you were joking. Two RTX 6000 Pros? Like, those are literal enterprise GPUs for post production studios and ML Labs, not Tim's Weekend Science Fun Kit.
Look, in my defense, I thought maybe the prices would come down. They didn't. For context for anyone listening, one RTX 6000 Pro Blackwell is around what, 8 grand, 9 grand? And that's per card. So dual GPUs alone are pushing 20 grand.
And that's just the GPUs. Then you needed a motherboard that could actually power them without melting, which is another 1,000. And 256 gigabytes of DDR5 ECC RAM, that's like 2 grand right there. Then the power supply that could run a small village. And don't forget the case that looks like a monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey just to house all that cooling.
Yeah. And the kicker? After we put all that together, we found a pre-built workstation with almost the exact same specs from one of the AI server vendors, and it costs more than the DIY build by like 10 grand. So suddenly my unhinged build was actually the economical option.
Economical option, he says, while holding a $40,000 shopping cart. Meanwhile, I'm over here running Quen on my MacBook like, this is fine.
Hey, to be fair, if you want to run big models locally, not 7Bs, not 14Bs, but those 120B class open models like GPT OSS 120B or the new Kimi models, you actually do need serious hardware. The MacBook is great for mid-range stuff, but it's not going to chew through a 120B in real time.
No, absolutely. And that's where the cost breakdown gets interesting. Because once we actually listed the numbers out, you realize something important. If you want to play in the Frontier Model tier at home, you're entering used Tesla pricing.
Yeah, that's the line. Running 7B or 14B. Any modern PC or a Mac Studio will do. Running 70B, now you need at least a 4090 or a 6000 Ada. Running 120B, now you're in multi-GPU territory. Running full context 200B plus, you're basically competing with cloud inference farms. At that point, you're going to have an electrician install a second breaker box.
Which, by the way, you actually had to do. That was maybe the funniest moment of the whole thing when you realized your home office wiring physically couldn't run two 600-watt GPUs and an AI-grade CPU at the same time without tripping the breaker.
Listen, the guy who installed my EV charger didn't judge me. He just said, you're doing a home AI project? You're not the first one, which honestly scared me more. That means there are other lunatics out there melting drywall for local inference.
This is where I'll defend cloud inference for a second. People really underestimate how cheap it actually is at scale. Like, if you're running occasional jobs or even steady workloads for a small project, paying OpenAI or Anthropic or NVIDIA for API access might cost you $200 a month. That's 30 years of API calls before you hit your GPU rig's price tag.
For sure. The economics only make sense if you're doing high volume inference with large models, odds Olten made, and to your Donsen. And you don't want rate limits, and you're optimizing for total cost over time. And you enjoy the smell of toasted PCIe slots.
And let's be honest, you do.
Look, it's a lifestyle.
But the real twist, and this is what surprised even me, is that running your own hardware isn't really about saving money. It's about freedom. No rate limits, no sharing GPUs with 1,000 other people, no waiting for API providers to support new architectures or longer contexts or new toolchain.
Yep, that's exactly it. If you want experimental features, weird local workflows, custom fine tunes, MCP servers running directly against a giant model without any API intermediary, local wins. But if you're just building apps for users, cloud wins 99% of the time.
So basically the same rule as home lab culture. No one builds a Kubernetes cluster in their garage because it's cheaper.
They build it because it's fun.
And because deep down, every developer wants to feel like Tony Stark booting up a server rack that glows ominously in the dark.
Yeah. And if the lights flicker in the neighborhood, that's just part of the experience. So maybe this is a good segue into something we both noticed while going down the hardware rabbit hole. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. Consumer GPUs still absolutely annihilate enterprise GPUs when it comes to price to performance. Like the 4090 may be just a gaming card, but for local AI, dollar for dollar, it's still the chain.
Yeah, and that's the irony, right? NVIDIA basically sells three tiers of the same silicon. There's the gaming card, the prosumer creative workstation card, and then the enterprise card with ECC memory and a warranty that lets you rack it in a data center without getting dirty looks from an auditor. But compute-wise, raw tensor throughput, the gaming cards punch way above their weight.
Exactly. A 4090 is what, 2.5 grand, maybe less now, and it runs a 70B model comfortably with quantization. Meanwhile, an enterprise card with slightly more VRAM costs 10 times as much. 10 times. And doesn't necessarily run that 70B any better, it just runs it with fewer memory errors and a more stable thermal profile.
And that's the thing. Enterprise hardware is built for predictability, not speed. It's about uptime guarantees, memory correction, long-term thermals, validated drivers. But if you're in your spare bedroom training allure on your cat photos, you don't need your GPU to be blessed by the Church of Sock 2.
No, you don't. And that's why most home AI rigs are hilariously overclocked gaming PCs. If you're not running a 24/7 production cluster, the consumer cards give you 90% of the performance at 10% of the cost. The only reason I ended up eyeing enterprise GPUs was because I wanted 128 gigabyte plus VRAM per card. Not because they were faster, because I wanted to brute force context windows the way God and Sam Altman intended.
Yeah, frontier scale context windows on local hardware is like deciding to build a Formula One engine out of IKEA furniture. You can do it, but you're really pushing the spirit of the product. But seriously, if you benchmark consumer versus enterprise cards on actual inference workflows, the difference is usually like 5–10%, but the cost difference is thousands of dollars.
And I think that's the key message for people listening who are starting to experiment with local model. Don't assume you need some monster enterprise GPU to run good LLMs. A single 4090 or 4080 Super can run most of the good open weight models today with shockingly good performance. Even the Mac Studio with the M4 Ultra can run mid range models really well.
Yeah, and I say this all the time. The only time enterprise GPUs make sense at home is if you're A, doing extreme context lengths, B, doing heavy fine tuning, C, experimenting with multiple big models simultaneously, or D, you just enjoy the smell of burning money.
Or E, you're like me and you want to say the phrase my inference cluster unironically.
That too. But seriously, for the typical developer or hobbyist, the consumer GPU path is still the sweet spot. Spend 2 grand, get world-class performance, skip the enterprise markup.
And honestly, the push from the open weights community is accelerating that trend. These new 120B-ish models running on consumer cards, 2 years ago that sounded like fantasy. Now it's a Tuesday.
Yeah, that's the part that blows my mind. The pace of optimization, quantization, speculative decoding, CUDA kernels, it's all moving faster than the hardware. The software is improving so fast that consumer GPUs keep getting more capable without you spending another dime.
So yeah, for local inference, consumer cards, maximum chaos and performance. Enterprise cards, maximum stability and wallet pain.
Put that on a t-shirt.
All right, let's wrap this thing. Today we covered a lot. Our backgrounds, the whole enabled AI versus frontier intelligence debate, the overloaded meaning of RAG, portable knowledge bases, the cost of going full home lab scientist, and why gaming cards still reign supreme for local AI. If you're listening to this and you're somewhere between, I want to run my own model and I just priced out a rack mounted water cooled monstrosity, just know we've been there. It's a slippery slope.
Very slippery, wallet-shaped slope. But seriously, thanks for hanging out with us. We love doing these deep dives, and apparently we love oversharing our hardware mistakes. If you have questions about building your own AI rig, or you want us to do a local AI starter kit episode, let us know. Yeah, we'll happily talk you out of.
Or into spending way too much money.
Until next time, this has been Rubber Duck Radio. Go build something weird. And maybe back up your breaker panel first. Always.